Oshun, that have to ask the students in the young presenting that question.
Right, warm welcome everyone. It is a pleasure to have you today on this session. My name is Dr. Justin Chinoperekwe, and I will give a brief welcome remarks before handing over this particular program to our host, Mr. Muhammad Faisal Barialai. We are the Center for Organization Leadership and Development, and we facilitate the Certified Organization Leadership and Development Consultant Program. And it is because of this particular program that we are hosting this guest session today to deliberate on issues pertinent to organization development and with a special focus on the public sector. We are humbled to be having Professor Jamieson once again and Dr. Christine to facilitate this particular conversation or guest lecture on organization development in the public and private sector. The field of organization development is fundamental to organizational effectiveness. And as the Center for Organization Leadership and Development, we are focused at advancing the OD field. We are focused at advancing the science, the theory, the practice, and the values of organization development, with a primary focus to facilitate organizational effectiveness. And following our last session with Professor Jamieson and Dr. Christine, the current candidates on the Certified Organization Leadership and Development Program requested for this particular session, primarily because most of the students on our current cohort are working in the public sector. And we are going to see briefly an introduction of some of the case studies that they are working on with the Ministry of Justice in Afghanistan and the Attorney General Office as well in Afghanistan. So our current cohort has a total of 12 students who are based in Afghanistan, in Botswana, in Zimbabwe, and in Kenya. I welcome you once again to this particular session, our Certified Organization Leadership and Development Consultant Program guest session, which is focused or premised on the principles and practices of organization development. Everything that we do as the Center for Organization Leadership and Development and the Organization Leadership and Development Network is primarily centered on the field of organization development. We are continuing to work on collaborations with international organizations in order to advance the field of OD in Africa and beyond. And we are humbled once again to be having Professor Jamieson and Dr. Christine. I think they are becoming a tag team on our COLD programs in terms of facilitating these sessions. We are so much humbled to have you once again. Our core values are global intelligence. We encourage our students, we encourage our members to have global intelligence and interact with people across continents. We facilitate inclusion of people, inclusion of ideas, inclusion of disciplines, because we believe these are the fundamental values of the OD field. We also emphasize ongoing personal and practitioner development, networking, and zest in designing and delivering OD activities. Our core motto is igniting insightful conversations in order to lead change, facilitate continuous improvement, and enhance or improve the human condition. So without taking much time, I will hand over this particular program to Mr. Muhammad Faisal Barialai, who is in Afghanistan and is a member of our current cohort of students. Over to you, Mr. Barialai.
Thank you so much, Dr. Justin, for your continuous inspiring helps and associations with different professionals and students all over the country. My video is off due to the lack of power and connection, so I will be only on the mic. Honorable change agents, charismatic leaders, mentors and coaches who inspire us, including our professional teammates and friends who joined us virtually. I wish you all a good time with blessings of health and safety. Our session focuses on practical organizational development interventions in both public and private sector reform and change. In today's environment, we live and work in diversity and change. Diversity to me is creativity, and I'm sure we have a taste of the diversity at the very moment with people of different culture, age, and ethnic group virtually joined for sharing knowledge from different corners of the world, aim to have a universal positive impact. You might have joined this session from different professional backgrounds, but I'm confident that you will definitely gain knowledge and be familiar with practical interventions commonly used on the field of OD for change, reform, and transition. Using the standard interventions will help us for better change and transformation. Welcome all. My name is Faisal Barialai, the host for today's program. I have the honor to introduce our first guest lecturer. Dr. David holds a PhD as a professor, department chair, organizational learning and development, College of Education, Leadership and Counseling at the University of St. Thomas. He is also president of the Jamieson Consultancy Group and Corporation and a distinguishing visiting scholar in other OD programs. Dr. David has 40 years of experience consulting to organizations on leadership, change, strategy, design, and human resource issues. He has over 20 years of experience coaching executives in many organizations across many sectors during challenging situations and contexts and in transition to new, different, and higher levels of responsibility. Dr. David is the past national president of the American Society for Training and Development, now Associated for Talent Development 1984, past chapter president of ETD-LA, and past chair of Management Consultation Division, 1996, and Practical Team Committee, 2000 to 2003, of Academy of Management. He was a recipient of 2015 Distinguished Scholar Practitioner Career Achievement Award from the Academy of Management and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Organization Development Network. He currently chairs the Organization Development Education Association. Dr. David is the co-author of Managing Workforce 2000, Gaining the Diversity Advantages, Joseph 1991, co-author of the Facilitators Field Book, 3rd edition, AMECOM 2012, co-author of Consultation for Organization Change, IAP 2010, and Consultation for Organization Change, Revisited 2016, and co-author of Handbook for Strategic HR, Best Practices in Organization Development for the OD Network, AMECOM 2012. In addition, he has published 16 chapters and numerous articles in journals and newsletters. He serves as editor of Seasoning and OD Network online journal, associate editor for the Reflection of Experience section of the Journal of Management Inquiry, and on the editorial board for Journal of Applied Behavioral Science, Journal of Organization Change Management, and Organization Development Practitioner. We warmly welcome you, sir, and thank for your time and insightful presentation that you will present in the session. I hand over to Dr. David. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. With such a nice introduction, I always wish that my mother was still alive to realize that I did turn out okay. But it's nice to hear that. So thank you so much, sir. I want to try to get my screen shared now. And yes, okay. And I wanted to just say when I received this introduction, I began to think about two things in particular that I wanted to kind of highlight today. One of them is how much OD is not really different across industries and sectors and types of organization. And yet, over my years in the field, what I've heard over and over and over again is, oh, everything's different when you're in public sector, or it all has to be different when you're in private sector or nonprofit. And so I've been thinking a bit about what I wanted to share today, and my message is that there is more ways for OD to be used in the same ways than there is in OD being different. There are differences, and I will say a few words about that, across sectors for sure, and across different types of industries even, and different countries in terms of businesses and organizations in different countries. But in some ways that doesn't change the basics and the core of OD and how we ought to do our work with the people that we're trying to help. So that was kind of the main message today. And secondly, I want to tell you how pleased I am to support people who are studying and learning more about OD and finding ways to apply this in their own world and in their own context. Perfect. Thank you. So there's three things that I want to spend a little time on this morning or this evening for you. OD, the same and different. I'll talk just a brief bit about that and what my experience has been with that. A few core basics that we always need to include. I like to highlight these things because even the field of OD has grown very diverse and very fragmented, and it's hard to understand what is the core and what do we have to pay attention to. And then some examples, which I think many of you will know better than I will because you're working in the public sector, but I can share a couple different things from the public sector, and how the work there for me was no different than working with other groups of people who were inside organizations trying to meet a mission. So so OD, same and different. So I've learned over the time period that so many people think that OD needs to be different when we're in different sectors and different industries. And a lot of times what I've found is people are focusing more on what's different about the context and about the types of tasks people are doing. But that does not necessarily change that much about how we need to be doing OD. What is different is the type of organization, meaning we need to understand any system that we work with, meaning we don't have to be expert at it, but we need to work jointly with leaders in organizations if we're trying to improve their effectiveness and build more healthy workplaces. So we do have to understand what they do and how the environment and the nature of their work gets influenced by different things that are happening around the world. So their purpose, their mission, and their tasks are important for us to know so that we can appropriately work with leaders. Because if we came only from banking and we tried to work with a manufacturing company, for example, we would not know the language and we would not understand how they're organized and how the work flows through a manufacturing organization. So while OD can be practiced in the same way, no matter what kind of organization they are, it does always help us to understand things about the organization without being as expert as the people who live in that organization and the ones who lead it. People and technologies are combined in almost every type of organization system there is. And it makes very little difference then what the sector or industry happens to be, because there's still people and technologies attempting to work jointly within an organization, trying to achieve whatever that organization's mission and purpose is. Okay. So the second thing we need to talk about is then what does provide core basics about OD, and what is it that we need to include no matter what type of organization we're walking into. And this was particularly true early in my career. I had been working with private sector organizations, and my partner and I at the time in a consulting business began making more inroads into local government, into working with cities and working with counties in the United States. And so as we began to do that, of course, we both discovered things that were different and things that they talked about and things that were on their agendas. But when it came to actually helping them improve their effectiveness and become a more high-performing organization, everything that we already knew about OD was really helpful and beneficial to them. And in some cases, they had not experienced much of that. And this was a number of years ago, but they had not experienced a bunch of that. And so once we could understand what their board and what their top leaders were concerned about and what their issues were, the rest of it was how did we look at the design of the organization, the relationships of people who needed to work together, and how did we, and then how they began to function better as work had to move from department to department, or how the actual system itself, that was in that case a government organization, would work. So I'm going to talk about these 8 pieces just briefly, so that we begin to see some ideas about what I think is core and basic. So in systems thinking, one of the things we have to remember is every system forms for a purpose. And so when we have an organization, which we know is a system, it's built as a system, they need to have a clear purpose. So there are a lot of systems that are ineffective and dysfunctional, partly because people inside of it are actually pursuing different purposes rather than a common purpose. So the system needs a purpose. The system is always made up of parts and wholes, and we have to understand when we're working with parts, those parts are being influenced by interactions across many other parts. And this is just basically what systems theory is about. And it's all about the interactions and interdependencies among parts that make up a whole. So when we see the results at the level of the whole, we do not fully understand all the interactions of parts that produce that. So remember that, because in today's world, when the outside world, the environmental world, has accelerated in its change and has accelerated in its complexity, that makes it even harder to know how all the interdependencies create the final results that we see. So interdependency simply means 2 parts that affect each other and that have some dependency on each other in terms of how they function. Now, a simple way to think about that is Department A and Department B in any organization. What A does sometimes really helps or hinders what B does. That's one example of how an interdependency works. And the levels of complexity in the environment and also inside has now grown a lot. And so we now have to think of our systems not in simple systems theory terms, but in more complex system theory terms, meaning we have to understand that a lot of the interactions will produce emergent results. They'll produce emergent elements. They'll produce emergent behaviors. And so we have to pay closer attention to that than we used to even 20 years ago, when the world was a little slower and a little more stable. So we have to think now in systems thinking about what can be planned. Doesn't mean we can't plan some things, but we're not going to be able to build a plan and expect everything to turn out the way we anticipate it, because there will be emergent reactions along the way. And so that's very important about systems theory. And when we study systems theory, we try to study dynamics and patterns. What patterns seem to get formed in this organization? What are the dynamics, the things that drive changes inside this organization in a natural way? So systems thinking is one very critical thing that is core to OD work, and we don't want to lose it no matter what type of organization we're in. The second piece is stakeholder theory. A guy named Edward Freeman has done some of the best work on stakeholder theory, and you can find it in 1 or 2 or maybe 3 books that he's done, I think. But stakeholder theory is about inside and outside the organization. It means who has a stake in what we do and how we do it. And the key to stakeholder theory that Edward Freeman put forward is about how we create value for all stakeholders. Now, I think we all know in the history of organizations, we have not created value for all the stakeholders. There are stakeholders that are privileged and there are stakeholders that aren't as privileged. There are people who are included and there are people who are excluded. So what stakeholder theory brings to OD is the importance of understanding whatever the organization is. Let's say it's a public sector organization or it's a private sector organization. Those two organizations have different sets of stakeholders, and they have different stakeholders that have the most power to affect the organization. So in the public sector, there are citizens and there are people in leadership roles that are voted in. In private organizations, there are people who are selected or appointed into leadership. So their constituent base is actually very different. So we have to understand every organization as a stakeholder map. And when we do that in OD work, it allows us to move to what are some of the other basics. And one of the big ones is inclusion and participation. OD from the start was always focused on who needs to be included and how do we engage them in a way that they participate. So we have to think across roles, across levels, inside and out, and also across any other differences, meaning whenever there are differences, we tend to create a hierarchy or a caste system when there are differences. And so we want to think of inclusion as meaning across differences as well as across roles and across levels and across different stakeholders who are inside and out. That's where the inclusion piece comes in. And the participation piece comes in because we need the knowledge, the experience, the perspectives, and the voices of all the stakeholders and all the people who have different data about how well the organization is doing or how poorly the organization is doing. So we need that information. And for years, management theory has tried to create the understanding that the people at the top have all the experience and knowledge needed to make good decisions. With the accelerated change in our world, that's no longer probably true. So now we need knowledge, experience, and perspectives that come from people who are sitting at different levels in the organization, people who are in touch with the customers, people who work inside the operation somewheres and don't deal with customers. They all have different data that's important. When we think about our goal is organization effectiveness and a healthy workplace. So those two things are our goals. We need different data. And then the last piece is engagement and psychological safety are critical if we're going to have any real participation. You can pretend you're participating when you have a lot of people speak and give input and it's all ignored. That is not real participation. Real participation requires people to be engaged, meaning they care about it and they believe and they can trust that you want to hear what they have to say. And then psychological safety means people don't feel like there's going to be consequences if they raise a different point of view, that they have some freedom to speak and that people are listening and trying to understand each other. So that's where inclusion and participation have been core and basic, I believe, almost from the very, very beginning of OD. OD has always been data-based, and I wanted to say that having some data is better than having none. So when I run into a leadership team who think they think they know it all that they need, and they're not interested in hearing anything or collecting any data or even sampling any data from other parts of the organization, I find that to be a big red flag, and we wonder about what that really means. How much are they trying to control the narrative and the understanding of what's going on in the organization? So database simply means that when we bring data forward, we have the chance for everybody to learn something different. When everybody thinks they know everything they need to know, that's almost always a mistake in today's world, because today's world, there's a lot of things that are new, that are unknown, and that are happening very fast. And we need to add a little bit of a learning perspective to almost everything we do, and not keep making assumptions that if I make decision A, this is the result we're going to get, because I made decision A before and we always got that result. That's not likely to continue happening. So when we're getting data, we can try to get it representatively. We can do some kind of sample. We can get it from everybody if our organization is not that big. But it all depends on size and difficulty and timing. We can't spend our life collecting data, but we also can't do good OD work that isn't in some way data-based. We also have to pay attention to more than just numbers. So many people think the whole world is described by measurement and numbers. The problem is there are a lot of very, very important variables in how well an organization is functioning that don't have numbers attached to it. Things like people's commitment and even people's engagement, which we now are measuring quite a bit. But engagement is a behavioral variable. So the question is not what the numbers say, whether our engagement is a 5 or an 8. It's our people jumping in and volunteering and participating when needed. And are they in fact working towards the mission and committed to it? Those are very important aspects. And that data, by the way, is often not in numbers, but it's more of a qualitative data, and it's more how it shows up in behavior that's important. So we always have to ask this question: what's important to know in order for us to take action or make changes? What do we need to know first? And that's the only reason why data-based is such a core piece. Partnering is our job. Our job as change agents is to partner with leaders. If you are a leader, then your job is to find a way to partner with people who can be change agents, meaning the expertise of the leader and the expertise of a change agent need to come together. And neither one of those always has both of those expertises. So leaders and change agents. So in our work, we have to have the right relationship. And the years that I spent full time in practice in the field taught me between good relationships with leaders and not so good relationships with leaders had made all the difference in how the rest of the work occurred. Our relationships need to be open, trusting, and respectful, meaning when we are together, I like to use the word even equal. In other words, in partnerships, people tend to be equal with each other, but it shows up as being open in sharing. It shows up being trusting of each other, and it shows up in being respectful of each other. So you can't be an effective change partner if the leader treats you like a vendor or like somebody who takes their orders. That's not the right relationship for change. So leaders do have different responsibilities. They're responsible for the outcomes of the organization. They have to make critical decisions. They have to make decisions about how resources are used. Change agents, however, provide help with a different expertise. If we bring change knowledge and we bring OD principles to work jointly with a leader, we can help make the change work better than just the way they may wish to do it. And so the nature of partnerships is what makes it work. And I think it's very interesting. I've been in partnerships. I've had 2 partnerships as businesses, and one worked really well and one didn't work really well. So I learned a lot about partnerships. And if you just study partnerships, it's a little bit like studying marriage in a way, because you have to find the right balance between the value and contributions and expertise of each other so that together you make a whole. And so the concept of partnering, I think, is a critical piece of how we can make OD work well. It's important to understand change, and the things that have made the most sense to me about change is that it is cyclical and that change always has phases. And so we need to remember that change is always a process. And I have been in many organizations where people think change is an event, or change is a workshop, or change is a or change is a policy being initiated and put out throughout the organization. On day 1 and probably day 100, that doesn't change a lot of people's behavior. And change is usually behavioral in the end. So even when we reorganize the structure, our intention is to get some different behaviors occurring. And so we have to remember that there's a process. And the process means that it will go through different phases. For the individual, it will go through possibly a resistance phase before there's a commitment phase. And for the whole organization, it'll have to go through some form of readiness before people will actually try and experiment doing different things. Action research, which is which was one of Kurt Lewin's major contributions, is a fascinating way to think about this, because action research is iterative and cyclical process in which people collect data, they make sense of the data, and they choose an action to take. Then they learn what happens from that action, and they use the new data to consider the next actions. And that becomes cycle 2. So action research has always been described that way. I wouldn't say it's being practiced that way all the time. But what's fascinating about it is that it recognizes a cycle and a process in change. And as you'll see, I think in the next one or two things I want to say is it integrates learning. That is, learning becomes very important in all changes. And I think it's fascinating that over the years, even when I was studying OD, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on how important learning theory is in change. But when you think about change, it means we're going to go from doing something one way to doing something another way. And we should respect the thought that learning is necessary. And the managers and the leaders have to also not resist the fact that they can learn more too. And in today's world, my God, after the last 10 years of rapid change, I think everybody's going to have to learn some new things. And then the system changes and dynamically reacts. That is, it does reactions in ways that are often unpredictable. But the system does change anytime there's a disruption, an intervention, or an action, meaning when something different is done, that system will change or dynamically react. So, so because of that, that is why we have to think of change in a process way, and how it will move through stages. And the more we understand those changes, the more we're not surprised when something we wanted to have happen doesn't happen immediately. So for leaders and change agents, I think it's important to remember that we need to keep our eyes on what and how. Every organization is challenged to determine what are they going to do and how are they going to do it. And in the world of stability 30 years ago, you could decide that once and probably continue it for quite a number of years or decades. Now we have to think about that even more often. So leaders and change agents have to stay focused on what the organization needs to do and how that should be done. The reason what and how are both important is because what gets at the content and how gets at the process. And forever we have talked about content and process, and everybody said OD works on the process, because when OD started, people were only making decisions about the content. What are we going to do? What's the best thing to do? What's our strategy? What's our goal? What got fouled up a lot was how it got done and how it worked inside the organization. So the process focus was very important in the founding of OD, and a lot of OD principles and practices deal well with how to make processes work better. But I want to suggest today that OD people and leaders need to both care about the what's and the how's, because the world we're living in is driving changes in both the what and the how. And what takes data and expertise so we can decide what we're going to do. The how involves the best ways we can create success, the desired outcome, and processes to help change behaviors, mindsets, and operating systems. Process is critical in our organization operations, and process is also critical in how we do any change. And finally, we use behavioral and organizational sciences. Behavioral sciences help us understand human beings, and that is half, if not more, of what every organization is full of. And it helps us understand organization behavior, and it certainly helps us understand change and how hard change is, and what people go through when they change. And all those nice models and theories that we have in OD that help to explain that. But the organization sciences help us to understand organization design, operations, work systems and processes, and how to use technology in work, the socio-technical aspects of organizations. So we need to use both of these if we're going to help build effective and healthy organizations, because we need organizations that can get the job done, and we need organizations that don't wear people down to nothing in the process. We need a healthy workplace where people can be comfortable at work, where people don't have to be discriminated at work, where people can do their best work, and that also has to perform well against the goals. So we can use both sets of sciences to help us. And I've always said OD needs both, even though there are OD programs that only teach us more about the behavioral sciences. So, as I said, you probably have much more experience working in public sector than I do, but across my career, I've worked probably 50% in private sector organizations, probably 30% in public sector, and maybe 20 in the nonprofit world. Because when I started out in consulting, I said to myself, I do not want to specialize in a sector or an industry. I want to practice OD across all kinds of organizations. Two areas that I spent a lot of time in was law enforcement and public education. And for the most part, I'll just share just a couple highlights and then let any questions help to focus it, or any of your own examples. In law enforcement, one of the things that I found early on was in working with, in our country, we have chiefs of police and we have sheriffs, and they pretty much run most of the law enforcement departments at the local level. And what I found a lot of them needing is getting their leadership teams organized and functioning more as a leadership team. And what that meant was, authority is very important in law enforcement, and it's semi-military in the way they think. So all these other senior leaders, they were called captains or they were called lieutenants, and they would be with the top person, but they wouldn't speak up and they wouldn't bring their ideas forward. They wouldn't use their particular data to change what was going on. And what a lot of sheriffs and chiefs that I met were interested in is they wanted a more equal leadership team, and they wanted the expertise of the other people. So you go back to all the team development work in OD, it wasn't any difference for them. It's about roles, it's about psychological safety, it's about participation by everyone on that team, because that's why they're on the team. And so there was quite a bit of work on teams when I started working with law enforcement. Well, and then let me tell you about public education then, because that started at the team level as well. Schools had principals, and then they had 2 or 3 other roles, usually vice principals and heads of counseling and stuff like that. And so doing some of the team building work at the school level was important. And as that began to be more successful, people at the district and state levels would look at that and say that they could actually function better too if they would increase the value and the interaction patterns that were occurring at their senior teams. So those are places, for example, that I've seen some of that happen. And I'll stop there with just the main message that I was saying, that we do OD in the same ways, whether it's public sector, private, or nonprofit. And as the change agent, what I often had to do was I had to learn what was different about the context they had, not anything that was different about OD. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really insightful and amazing. Not only to me and to the participants, and I see the comments here that your presentation was really a present, a precious gift, and it solved the problems and the challenges within our minds, so that we will focus more on what really OD is, and
Yes.
exactly the changes gonna happen if we don't change the government institution, whether it's private or public institution. If the change is not gonna happen, then we will collapse sooner or later with failure. So change and organization development is the vital blood in every organization. So we will have certain questions. If the participants are having questions, they can raise their hand or they can have it in the chat box, or Dr. David will have his insightful answers to your imposed question.
I don't know how insightful. Dr. Christine will pick up on the insightful stuff.
So I will have a
Yes.
question meanwhile, sir.
Yes, as we wait for questions, maybe we have about 3 minutes. We have Dr. Cornell. She has done consulting work in the public sector. I would ask her to give a word in maybe 1 minute. We have Dr. Dotun, was also working with the British Council and other organizations. Maybe 1 minute will do. And Dr. Violet is in quality assurance in the higher education sector. Maybe also you can have a minute just to put things in context. And anyone else, I saw a hand from Dr. Nuri. You can also share some insights. Dr. Cornell.
All right, sorry, I had to switch devices here because the one's battery is running out. But thank you very much for the invite to start off with, and thank you for asking me to participate. Can I please just congratulate and say thank you for the insights that have been shared. You know, sometimes I feel very sad that I wasn't part of this fraternity long ago already, because every time I attend one of these sessions, I just gulp up a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for sharing experiences. And I must agree definitely with Professor Jamieson in the sense of, I've also worked in the private sector and the public sector, and it ranges from the military right through to mining to regulatory environment. And I must agree that whether you're working in private or public sector, the context and the content of the organization is what determines the OD, not where you are in terms of whether it's private and public or public. So I fully agree with that. And I'm also a big systems theory fan, if I can call it that. So because, you know, the whole works according to the parts. So if you don't give attention to all the parts, you're going to miss out. And if you don't consider asking advice from the lowest level staff member, who is most probably experiencing things completely different than the executives are, you will never have full participation because you won't understand everything that's happening in the organization. So from my side, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the next presentations, but yeah, that's my 1 minute full of sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Dotun.
Thank you. So I think I actually came here as a student. I didn't come here as a contributor because every single word dropped here is so significant and so important. So, but what that is very outstanding to me as part of what Professor have said is number one, as we deepen more in the role of OD, we see more. So OD has a lot of boundaryless components, and it keeps evolving as we engage in roles and responsibilities and assignments.
Yeah.
And I come to realize I have been having this mental challenge, but now I think I'm not clear. Also, I've been able to clarify my worry. I find myself sometimes consulting for 2-3 organizations in the same industry. In fact, having almost the same similar challenge. But I feel that even when I try to apply almost the same principles, they don't work. Why? Because the peculiarities of the internal structure, the people differences dictate how the models we apply in that organization. So I think Professor Jamieson has been able to clarify this my worry over a long period of time. I think I'm so blessed. Thank you so much.
Yes. Well, and that makes perfect sense, because if you do work in the same industry, two things will happen. One is you will know their common issues. And so many of the ways you intervene might be similar, but the people are still different in each organization.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Madam Maureen, after Madam Violet, Dr. Violet, Maureen, and then I think if anyone wants to contribute, please do raise your hand so that we do justice to all contributions. Dr. Violet.
Thank you, Dr. Justin. You are always on point for getting us good and dedicated personnel and facilitators. This is excellent as usual. Yeah, well done, and the team behind you. I also want to thank the professor. My statement in the first instance is to just support again what he has said, that the educated of the 21st century are those who are able to learn, unlearn, and relearn.
Yeah.
Because what he is saying is we are in a dynamic and fast changing world. And so if you continue to hold on to what you did last time and the way you tackled it, you will miss everything. And then the other thing which I also wanted to say is in higher and tertiary education, with the fourth industrial revolution and the outbreak of COVID-19, I told higher education institution leaders and all the personnel to say, you need to shape up or ship out. And this goes to say the behavior, the individual culture, the organizational culture, and the national culture have a lot to do with change management and the way people accept change. And so if those who are fast changing are taking on board what is coming, they are always ahead of the situation and they are the major beneficiaries. Once more, Prof, there's no time, but I just want to thank you and thank you, Dr. Justin. Thank you, everybody who has joined the session. It's wonderful. I thank you.
Thank you. Madam Maureen, you have 1 minute so that we don't eat Dr. Christine's time. Maureen.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, fine. Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to thank the leadership of OLDN and the professor. This conversation is a very, very key one. And in fact, I personally found it invaluable because I have listened to a professor. I have picked some very, very important keywords in this presentation, and it is really, really going to help some of us that are just coming in into the practice of organizational development. I looked at when he says that every organization is a stakeholder map. And that statement bounced back seriously to me because from the environment, from my environment, from the sector I operate in, we had a lot of stakeholders. We have a very complex business environment. We have a very divergent units of operations in the industry. And it has been very, very difficult to get people to unite and see how they can harness the large size of our industry, of the components of our industry, and find a point where we could actually work as stakeholders that have some level of interdependence that determines our success and determines our failure collectively in the industry. I don't know if I still have 1 minute. I just wanted to cite an example. I just came out from a meeting of an automotive after-sales services. There was a discussion this afternoon on their survivability for 2021. And one of the highlights in the discussion is that the inability of the operators in the industry to agree to a particular terms has made it impossible for the government to actually be serious on developing and delivering policies that can attract investors into the industry. Because the manufacturers in the industry, by the way, I'm talking about automobile industry, automobile and automotive industry. That is where the prime business that my company is running. The manufacturers of automobile and automotives want a different policy. And the importers of fairly used vehicles and components they're also coming from a different direction. And I want to believe that if we all understand what development of the automobile industry is and what it entails, there is need for us to have an agreement where we will find a place where every stakeholder will agree and be able to relate in such a way that we will survive. Because as it is now, the manufacturers are not going to survive and the importers are not going to survive with the current policy that the government has just signed into law. None of us are going to survive. And that is the situation where we find ourselves. So OD is a very important discipline to me, particularly because there is a lot of chaos and disagreement in the place where I operate. Thank you very much. I find that this very, very relevant, and I believe is going to drive my own plans in the industry.
That's very nice.
Thank you so much. Prof. Dev, anything you want to say before Mr. Barialai takes over?
No.
Okay, Barialai.
I have one question, sir. We are dealing with a very complex environment, especially in the government organizations. When I say complex environment, it means that the systems are not really systems that are working, that people are having different ideas and different aims. The organizational strategy and aims are one thing, and on the reality, they are working for their personal gains. And unfortunately, we have been facing the problems of getting engaged with the top management on to discuss the real needs. They show ego, they think that they are very superior from the others. Yeah. And these, in such kind of environment, which I shall say, unfortunately, that corruption is also a big obstacles. How a person like we, I may call ourselves the freshers to the OD field, will face such kind of people, system, thoughts, and processes. How can we change? How can we initiate change to be someone different, to be a change agent, to be someone who shines the future of the country? Thank you so much, sir.
Well, just one comment to that, because I understand what you're saying is superiority and ego and leadership resistance are three of the areas that we have the most difficulty breaking through. And so one of the things that I think is one of the more valuable ways to do it is first, we work on building our own relationships with leaders, with individuals. It doesn't have to be all of them, doesn't have to be the top one, but it has to be some leaders where we build a stronger relationship so that what we say can be seen credibly. That's one issue. The other issue is data speaks louder than any of our voices. If you can get any kind of data that you can bring in front of leaders that at least challenges their assumptions, there's a chance then to be able to be a partner with them and say, we can help. We know how to bring about change. If you're interested in changing something, we can help you. So you have to get to that stage, though. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. I guess there is no questions, but appreciations to you. We will end with your inspiring talk